Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are joined today by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a briefing and a top overview of the current events happening in Israel this week. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. It's been a very good week for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I'll explain a number of things that have happened, which definitely will make it an easier few weeks and months ahead, certainly with the Knesset recess starting next week. First of all, and most importantly, I've been saying this for quite a while, the most important thing for Netanyahu for the last few months has been passing the budget, because as we know, according to the laws of Israel, if a budget isn't passed within 3 months of the beginning of the year or after a new government, then immediately we go to elections without anything further. And there's only 5 more days till the end of the month. And Netanyahu managed not just to pass the budget by 1 vote, which it looked like it could possibly be a few weeks ago, with threats from some of the ultra-Orthodox parties and some of the others, but he actually passed it significantly easy. It was in the end 66 to 52. It wasn't even close. It was a 620 billion shekel budget, the largest in history, but also possibly, probably, arguably one of the least popular in history. And that's because it is a war budget, and the economy in Israel, robust and strong, certainly is one that needed to increase taxes, to cut benefits, all these sort of things. As opposition leader Yair Lapid said, it is one that attacks and crushes the middle class. I'm just repeating what he said, but certainly there wasn't much in there for the average citizen who's already seeing prices go up. VAT has gone up, the cost of electricity, of water, of petrol, of basic food has gone up. So this isn't one that particularly will be, this isn't a budget that will particularly be loved by Israelis. And probably because of that, we certainly saw Netanyahu take a step back publicly. Usually when there's a budget, he likes to crow about all the different elements that he believes he can sell. The fact that he remained relatively silent on the budget in the lead up to and even during the debate shows that this is not one that he wanted to be too publicly associated with. And he certainly allowed Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who's the one who usually compiles the budget at first. Obviously, there's a lot of back and forth. He allowed him to really take the reins and take center stage. Some intimated to basically put an unpopular budget on an unpopular finance minister. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, as I said, for Netanyahu is that the budget passed. The threat, the immediate threat to his coalition has massively subsided. All of the coalition partners will have looked at this and said he got 66 to 52. That's significant. And it takes away a lot of their potential leverage if they decide in the future to once again threaten the coalition, knowing that he has such a strong majority, and also knowing that that if they do decide to bring down this government or threaten to bring down the government, they would certainly have to have a very substantive reason for doing so, as I mentioned last week. But there were some developments. The ultra-Orthodox certainly stepped back from the brink. We did see a very minor resignation. Goldknopf, apparently most people in Israel didn't even know, he apparently has another ministerial job, a fairly vacuous one, a minister inside the Prime Minister's office. There are actually a number of those, but he stayed as Minister of Housing. which is the most important one. Golkanov himself had a very bad week. Even people in the coalition calling for him to quit. He was seen dancing at his nephew's wedding while the music around and everybody singing that this is a government of infidels, of non-believers, and we would rather die than enter into their army. One can imagine a minister of a government dancing to music, which basically calls the government that he works in a government of infidels. One can imagine that didn't go down very well, and even ministers within the government, including Amichai Shikli, the Diaspora Affairs Minister from Likud, calling him for his resignation. He had to obviously apologize, and Netanyahu gave a very weak sort of, I accept his apology, he shouldn't have done it, now let's move on. This was after Golkanov himself said that in a town of Beit Shemesh, which is a mixed ultra-Orthodox, non-ultra-Orthodox community, he boasted in a closed meeting that was subsequently recorded, or was recorded and subsequently released, that he has basically taken all these building plans for the general population and made sure they go just to the ultra-Orthodox community. So he basically had a very bad week. Perhaps it's no coincidence that his threats to leave the government, he was the one who was most likely to leave, came to nothing, and he kind of had to retreat with the tail between his legs from someone who considered his position very powerful. Now it's extremely weak. The second thing, major event that's literally happening now is a judicial reform bill. Now, if we remember back before October 7th, 2023, the big issue in Israel was the judicial reform. Some called it judicial coup, or whatever you want, depending on which side of the aisle you stood. But one of the major elements of this judicial reform was Yariv Levin, Minister of Justice Yariv Levin, who wanted to change the makeup of the Judicial Selection Committee. Why is that important? Because that is the committee that appoints the judges at the Supreme Court level. And there's long been an assessment, especially by the right, that the judicial system gives itself too much powers to basically appoint itself. And because of that, there's very little ideological difference from one Supreme Court to the next. And it's time that the wings were clipped a little bit of the judicial system, especially at the highest levels. And the original idea was to give the coalition almost complete power, really turn it on its head, and give the coalition, those in power, almost complete control over that judicial appointments committee, selection committee, and be able to appoint their own people. Today, the makeup of the Supreme Court is actually relatively even between liberals and conservatives. But if this judicial reform bill goes through, then it certainly will give the coalition more ability to assign its own judges. It won't be as extreme as Yariv Levin would have liked it. And there was this Yariv Levin and Gideon Sa'ar who sat down to try and work out a compromise. I'm not going to go into all the nuts and bolts of it, but there has to be some buy-in from the opposition. The judicial system itself no longer has a veto, as it once did on certain appointments, and the coalition doesn't get its own way, but it certainly has more power than currently, and that's a major, if it passes, which undoubtedly it will, especially after the opposition, the leaders of the opposition parties have all said that they will boycott the vote tonight, then it seems like it's a foregone conclusion. And judging by the way the budget was so easy to pass, even if the opposition came, probably all they would be able to do is filibuster and make sure that the votes were only taken tomorrow morning. So that's a major win, another major win for Netanyahu. A third major win, or let's say a win, I'm not sure if it's a major win, was when the High Court, interestingly enough, we're talking about the High Court, the one of the things that Netanyahu started talking about this week is the whole concept of a deep state, how the deep state, runs through the judiciary, the media, unelected officials, bureaucrats, etc., and it always seems to go against the right-wing government. Well, interestingly, the Supreme Court actually did find, to a certain extent, on behalf of Netanyahu, today or in the last couple of days. As we know, Netanyahu wanted to fire the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, but the Attorney General basically said, not only are you not allowed to fire him, you have to also wait to even interview any candidates before the appointments committee has discussed it, and we see real reasons to do so. The High Court sort of took a middle position, saying you're not allowed to fire him at the moment, but you can start interviewing candidates. So that's something that drives the whole process forward, and that will certainly have pleased Netanyahu, again, to a certain extent. What this means for Israel as a whole is we're back to very divisive times. We've seen in the last week, since the call to, or the attempt to fire Ronen Bar, the beginning of the attempt to fire the Attorney General and pass this judicial reform bill, coupled with a few other issues which are to the dissatisfaction, according to polls, of the majority of Israelis, whether it's the budget or the continued non-enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox population. We did see many groups take to the streets, especially in Jerusalem, around the Knesset and around the government quarter. They were there pretty much every day. We did see scenes, again, going back to where we were October 6th, 2023, with major demonstrations, with the police arresting various figures, with attempting to get over barriers, perhaps to the Prime Minister's office, etc. And we really are back to where we were before. One of the findings of the IDF and the Shin Bet and some of the other investigations were that one of the contributing factors to October 7th is Hamas saw weakness in Israeli society through these divisions and felt now is a time to strike. We are pretty much where we were then, with the divisions in Israeli society, certainly as opposed to before the war. The coalition is still doing weakly in the polls, even though, as I said, the coalition itself has been firmed up and strengthened this week. So we're in difficult times. Leader of the national camp, Benny Gantz, has asked for a meeting with Yariv Levin and some other government ministers to explain that this is not the time to do such divisive, to take such divisive steps while we're in the middle of a war. But it's clear that those calls will remain on deaf ears, especially with the government buoyed by the budget victory and feeling that they are able, now is the time, perhaps because of that, perhaps because the country is distracted with the war, perhaps with a number of other reasons, now is the time to push through some of these issues. As far as Gaza goes, we've seen some very interesting developments. Israel is taking a slightly different stance, or the IDF is taking a different stance going in this time. As previously, it's going in a three-pronged attack from the north, the south, and the center, something which many Israelis were critical at the beginning of the war, that it went in only in one area and just sort of pushed in other directions. Now it's doing something which it should have done at the beginning of the war and come in different places. It is returning to areas which it has conquered many times, and we'll see whether the new chief of staff has a different tactic that didn't seem to work last time. Last time it was conquer an area and then leave it, and then allow Hamas to regroup in that area afterwards, and then the IDF would have to go back. There was a lot of people, not just in Israel, but around the world. Former US Chief of Staff General Petraeus certainly was very critical of that. And we'll have to see whether the new Chief of Staff has a different plan for that. What this means for the negotiations, at the moment, not much. Hamas do not feel overly threatened by the IDF, hasn't gone in with a massive power that many people expected yet. There are build-ups, there is talk, there is even talk of enlisting tens of thousands of Israeli reservists, although those call-ups have not yet officially been given out. But Hamas still feels relatively comfortable in its tunnels and at the negotiating table. Don't forget, we're down to the last live a couple of dozen hostages. So Hamas know that this is not a time to give more hostages without getting anything in return. And for them, their big demand still remains the sticking point. Apparently, they're showing flexibility in a lot of things, but not the course for the end of the war, which for Israel is a red line. So at the moment, things seem to be stuck. There doesn't seem to be too much movement. There doesn't seem to be too many heavy hitters on the Israel or the US side trying to force the issue forward. It does seem that the Trump administration is allowing Israel a free hand to do what it wants in Gaza. But at the moment, that seems to mean that negotiations aren't going anywhere. What Hamas is facing, which is pretty unique, is an uprising. Again, there's certainly a big debate how big it is, but an uprising amongst Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. We've started to see hundreds, maybe thousands in areas we have never seen before. And we're seeing far more brazen sort of attacks on Hamas from leaders of certain clans, prominent clans in Gaza, coming out openly on in videos with their face completely uncovered. Everyone knows who they are, saying Hamas has to go. It's enough. These are very interesting times. We'll have to wait to see what's happening. Unfortunately, Defense Minister Israel Katz, many people were arguing this is not a time for Israel to take a stand on this. It shouldn't be pushing it forward, because one can imagine Hamas would jump all over that and say, look, it's an Israel orchestrated uprising. Unfortunately, Defense Minister Israel Katz did not get that memo and came out and basically tried to push some of these demonstrations forward. But still, they are there. They are legitimate. Whether they are partly run by the Palestinian Authority and Fatah elements taking advantage of the situation, whether they are from the ground up, that remains to be seen. Probably a little bit of both. But certainly, while they're still small, these demonstrations by Gazans against Hamas, openly, brazenly, by the hundreds, if not thousands, in Hamas strongholds, shows a number of things, that the people do feel that they are weaker, while there's been an assessment that Hamas numbers have regained to about 20 to 25,000, including Islamic Jihad. There is a feeling a lot of these members are young, just Gazans who are basically given a gun and said, and a uniform, and now you're part of Hamas. And they do not instill the same level of fear as Hamas did before the 7th of October. This is one thing that's abundantly clear. Whether Hamas will come out and really crack down on that, there is a debate. And even the tactic that some in Israel are saying that they're trying to do is Islamic Jihad. We saw it today, that they're trying to fire rockets from areas close to where the demonstrations are taking place, in the knowledge that Israel will respond specifically to those rocket launchers, and then they can blame Israel and try and rally some sort of Palestinian solidarity against the common enemy. That's a tactic they're trying at the moment. They're not coming down and beating up demonstrators and arresting them. Whether that's because they can't, whether that's because they're just biding their time, we'll have to wait and see. But certainly interesting developments in the Gaza Strip. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Now, you kind of touched on this right before you finished your remarks there. You mentioned the possibility of the PA or possibly Fatah having a hand in these demonstrations in Gaza. That being said, while these demonstrators are clearly not happy with Hamas, does this maybe suggest that there are at least some Gazans who are open to peaceful coexistence with Israel, or is it more likely the case that they simply are fed up with Hamas, but would likely vote in an equally radical, problematic anti-Islamist party? Excuse me, Islamist anti-Israel party.
I don't think many of these demonstrators are pro-Israel or even pro-peace. Certainly before the war, or even whenever a poll is taken on attitudes in Gaza towards Israel, it's anti-peace, it's anti-Israel. But yeah, a part of it is that they're fed up. A part of it is they're starting to see weaknesses, perhaps in Hamas's abilities to govern militarily or politically, and they see an opportunity. I'm sure they're fed up. You know, there's 2 million people there who have suffered, 16, 17 months of bombardment of attacks because of what Hamas and others did on October 7th. Of course, we know that there were civilians who took part in October 7th and involved in some of the hostage taking or the hostage holding. But I'm sure many of them are fed up. They probably thought that during the first ceasefire, this was a time to go back to their homes, to start rebuilding. And now they see that Hamas basically are not interested in furthering the deals, in releasing the hostages, and Israel is back to fighting. And I think there's a certain amount of that they're fed up. Certainly, Hamas opponents, whether they're in Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, or elsewhere, are certainly taking advantage of this, but they don't probably have that much strength in the Gaza Strip. They've certainly been weakened over the years by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So it probably is largely a grassroots, or certainly speaks to a certain amount of weariness on the part of Gazans, but it also certainly has to speak to a certain amount of a lessening of fear. Let's not forget that Hamas is a dictatorship, and they ran a government on fear, very much controlling the Gaza Strip because they were the only gun in town. But there are people now who feel that this is maybe an opportunity, and they do not fear Hamas as they once did. And that's why you see these people who are openly showing their faces. They're not trying to mask themselves or anything like that. So I think that it's a little bit of both, a little bit of war weariness, that they're fed up, and also the fear of Hamas has certainly subsided in recent days.
Thank you. Now, on the note, or on the subject of the protests in Gaza here, I have a question from Stephen Orlow, who asks, is the Prime Minister correct in claiming that the recent large-scale protests of Gazans against Hamas a vindication of the new strategy regarding the resumption of military action?
To a certain extent. If Israel hadn't have restarted the war, restarted military activities in Gaza, probably this wouldn't have happened. But as I said, it's not just about what Israel is doing. It's all related, obviously. But it's something, again, that Israel probably shouldn't take too much credit for, should stay really much in the background. That's what a lot of commentators and analysts are saying. Whether it's the Prime Minister or the Defense Minister, Israel should stay out of this publicly. And unfortunately, we have seen a few statements which certainly go against that and can harm it, because, for Israel, it's certainly a welcome thing, but it's not for the Prime Minister or Defense Minister of Israel to openly state that. Whether they feel that it would win some points at home, that's certainly a debate, but it will certainly delegitimize these demonstrations if they're seen as, even having the tacit support of Israel.
Great, thank you. Now, I have a question here from Peter Levy, who asks, is the IDF going to start partitioning Gaza so that it can be annexed by Israel if Hamas continues to withhold the hostages?
Well, interestingly, the issue of taking territory has come up over the last couple of weeks. There has long been this line of thought, especially on the sort of far right in Israel, that the only thing that the Palestinians really, really value is land. And if you take that away from them, then that can bring them to the negotiating table or just punish them. There have been very, very few calls for annexing Gaza or reoccupying it on a more permanent basis. But there has been calls recently that perhaps that can serve as some level of deterrent to Hamas, whether it would take a certain amount of territory for a certain amount of time. We did hear Netanyahu speak from the Knesset floor today. There's such a thing in Israeli politics as a 40 signature event, which is when the opposition obviously manages to get 40 signatures, which ensures that the Prime Minister has to attend a Knesset session where he answers the questions and he'll speak, etc., kind of like question time in the UK. And he was forced to give his own speech, where he did mention the possibility of one of the things they're looking at is taking territory. Now, he didn't use the word annexation, and I don't think you'll hear that word come out of Netanyahu's mouth, certainly not in relationship to Gaza, but the idea of taking territory, creating a security, a secure territory, a no man's land, is one that's been talked about since the beginning of the conflict, and probably one that is being considered at the political and security levels. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what that means. But he talked about that and said there's a few other things that we can do, which I prefer not to talk about at this point. So we'll wait and see exactly what those things are.
Okay, thank you. Now, there are some indications, it seems, that Hamas is weakening, one example being the uprising of Gazans against Hamas. But but there's also reports that say that during the last ceasefire, Hamas has been able to rebuild and regroup significantly. To what extent, if any, has Hamas been able to rebuild their numbers, their tunnels, their arms since the last ceasefire?
Well, there is a debate on that. You know, Netanyahu talked during the last round that Israel has demolished 20 out of 24 Hamas battalions. Now, these largely are well-trained fighters who have basically been in Hamas for many years and have trained and have the ideology and know what it is to be a member of Hamas with all the brutality involved. Many of those were killed. Israel puts a number around 20,000 of terrorists killed in Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Now, it's not that hard in a population of around 2 million people where the majority are under 18 to just grab a couple of, 20,000, 15,000, whatever it is, even 25,000 youths, put a gun in their hand, give them some money, give them a uniform and say, now you're a part of Hamas. And that's probably what's happened. These are non-trained young Palestinians that Hamas has been able to recruit. Let's not forget that not only do they have the control of arms, they will have control of finances in the Strip as well because of the humanitarian aid, etc. So they're able to pay in an economy where few others are able to. So it has been quite easy for Hamas probably to replenish their ranks, but these are not well-trained fighters. At the moment, Hamas are not doing even what it was able to do, towards the end of the last round. It's not able to put, bombs, booby traps, come out from different tunnels and attack the IDF. So far, we haven't seen this at all. The IDF has pretty much been able to take whatever positions it wants to, wherever it wants to, probably because Hamas is still hiding in the tunnels. Their tactic at this point is probably trying to see if they can wait out the IDF, how much patience the Israeli public has. They put out another video of two of the Israeli hostages because they think, and to a certain extent they're right, that plays psychologically, very well for them in their cause in the Israeli public, and it certainly does. So at the moment, it does seem that Hamas's tactic is hide and just wait and see.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question here. And I guess if we can move away from the front lines and the battlefields, Jack Wasserman would like to ask, has the appointment of Caroline Glick made a difference in Netanyahu's PR?
Internally or externally? I think internally, I don't think she is as involved. She's more in the external PR. She was with him when he went to the US. She is involved, but less so in what's going on domestically. She will be one of the voices in the room. She's not one of the primary voices in the room at any one time. But I'm not on a military level. She's not necessarily consulted. Probably on a diplomatic level to a certain extent, but her role is not front and center. She's not one of the closest people to Netanyahu. She's not in every meeting. She's certainly not in security meetings. So as far as what we saw this week in the Knesset, she's not really involved. What we see on the security and the defense level, she's not really again there. And Netanyahu isn't really doing too much in the sort of the public forum. He does every now and again give an interview to usually American broadcaster. So perhaps she's involved a little bit there with some of the communication points and the talking points, but probably not that much at this point beyond.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I am afraid that is all the time we have this week. Thank you again for taking the time to update us.
Absolutely.
Now, for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout in your email inboxes over the weekend for our upcoming podcast email. And if you have not done so already, I encourage all of you to please sign up for the Middle East Forum's annual policy conference in Washington, D.C., the week of May 19th. It'll feature panel discussions, keynote presentations, and a exclusive War Games Day on the 22nd. We encourage you all to register. Just go to www.meforum.org/policyconference 2025, and the details are all there. Hope to see you there. And as always, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.